So, welcome to the latest episode of And Why Is That podcast. The date today, for reference, because things keep changing so quickly, is Thursday, the 22nd of January 2026. God knows what will happen on Friday, the 23rd at this point. But joining us is Dale Heinken. It's spelt like Heineken, but without the extra E.
That's correct.
Yeah. Dale is a US native, is married an Australian, living in Tasmania. But we're not talking about Tasmania. We're
talking about the high seas.
We're talking about the high seas because amongst his very storied career with the US Navy, Dale was, on his last posting, the captain of the USS Boxer, which is a ship known as an LHD-4, which is an amphibious assault ship. The rest of us would call it a bloody big aircraft carrier. It just doesn't have catapults. So that's probably a good place to start. We're going to nerd out a bit this time and talk about the mechanics of the Navy, of which Dale knows a great deal. He spent his entire career, 26 years, in the Navy. He's now consulting in a number of areas in defence and in nuclear areas because he was originally a nuclear propulsion engineer.
I still am. It's
still
just
are?
we call it a subspecialty. So I have surface warfare, very much like a deck officer, a maritime warfare officer in the Australian Navy, but with a subspecialty in nuclear propulsion. I spend quite a bit of time on aircraft carriers.
You were on the Theodore Roosevelt, which is one of the, is that a Nimitz class?
It is.
Yeah. But first, thank you for joining us. It's a great pleasure to have you with us and to have someone who knows so much about such a fascinating area that we know so little about. So I'll kick off with the first question being, what is the difference between an LHD-4 like the Boxer and a Nimitz or a Ford-class nuclear aircraft carrier, apart from size?
All right. Thanks, John and Alexander. Appreciate being here as well and being able to speak with both of you. So the really difference is the size as well as the mission role. So the Nimitz-class aircraft carriers, CVN, so nuclear-powered. So that's one big difference is they have nuclear reactors. Where you're looking at your LHDs, your amphibious assault ships, your aircraft carriers, ours had a 700-pound boiler, so very much World War II technology.
Okay.
There, some of the newer ones have gas turbines that use it, but the Nimitz class as well as the Ford are all nuclear powered. They're also larger, about twice as big, and they carry an air wing on them. So a nuclear aircraft carrier, you're looking at about 96,000 tons. And then a amphibious aircraft carrier, you're looking at about 40 to 42,000 tons, depending on what you loaded. So it varies. So unloaded would be 40,000, and then when you have all the Marines and their tanks and all their other gear on board, you're looking at about 42,000 tons of displacement. So quite a big difference in size. And then it's also the mission. So the aircraft carrier is about power projection. So sending jets and helicopters into hostile territory or on patrols flying around, really kind of what as it sounds, power projecting that power forward. Where you're looking at the LHD is more about supporting Marines. So the Marines are your amphibious infantry. They're designed for really kind of that quick in and out, not like an army where it goes in for a long time and stabilizes for a prolonged period. Marines are very rapid reaction. They go in, they make it an assault. You look at Korea, Incheon and all that stuff. They go in, they make a landing on a beach, they secure it, and then all the aircraft associated with it is very much about supporting that infantry person on the beach.
And that aircraft comes from a boat like yours?
Correct.
Yeah.
And there's other amphibious ships in there as well. You've got the LPDs.
Yeah.
And they'll have like the attack helicopters on board. So you'll spread all those aviation assets, but the LHD is primarily your aircraft carrier for that. And really one of the best ways I think of looking at it, because that's what when I first saw it, that's what I saw. I was like, that's a World War II aircraft carrier. Yeah. It looks just like the silhouette looks just like a World War II aircraft carrier. And when you get into the propulsion system, it's a 700-pound steam plant. Yeah. So it's using gas to heat steam or heat water and produce steam and cause turbines to go around. And it's still very much that technology of you've got a person with a lighter that basically puts it into the the combustion chamber, lights it, and it's a very kind of medieval.
What a fun job that would be. Hey? So it's your turn to light it today.
But you do that, but it's still just incredibly effective. And when you look at nuclear, it's a steam plant too.
Yeah, you're driving turbines.
The difference is it's a really hot rock. In the middle, that's producing steam versus gas.
So this is the thing that fascinates. But people talk about nuclear powers. It's like some sort of magic that happens, but it's boiling water.
Yeah, It's at the end of the day, it's a steam plant.
Yeah.
It just has a really hot rock in the middle that produces hot water and eventually steam that turns the turbines. But it's the same technology as far as that goes.
Yeah.
So presumably nuclear-powered craft can stay at sea much longer. How long can an amphibious gas-powered one stay at sea?
So you have to refuel, and it depends on your operations. If you're doing a lot of high-speed operations, you burn through more fuel. I think when we were operating off the coast of Africa and in the Arabian Gulf, we were refueling about once every other week, because you're also burning through flight fuel as you're doing flight operations, because pilots have to maintain proficiency. Or if you're doing missions, it depends on that op tempo. But if you're also having to sprint from one area to another to do that, or you got a lot of heavy seas, so it affects that burn rate. But what you generally try to do is be economical, so you don't have to replenish fuel that often. And sometimes if you're going slow, you'll go a couple of weeks, maybe a month without fuel. But food is what you
Right.
Yeah.
And so let's get to the refueling obviously happens, one assumes, ship to ship from tankers that rendezvous with you at certain points, which is a logistic exercise that's mind-boggling in itself, because you're moving and they've got to get tankers to you, or they carry, because they're burning fuel as well. So they're coming from different locations, one assumes. But the food thing, you mentioned off air that the complement of, let's just go through the complement a little bit. Fully armed, I think we understand that you can take, in terms of aircraft, up to 20 F-35s.
You could take that as a full complement. When we deployed, we had about 6 of the Harriers because we weren't quite outfitted for the F-35 yet, and that's requires a little bit of, modernization, retrofit of the older platforms, because of the VTOL, or the direction of the thrust is so hot that they have to strengthen the flight deck.
So
and they have to put on a special treatment.
VTOL being vertical takeoff and landing. Yeah.
And because that jet blast from those F-35s is so hot and intense, they have to put a special coating on the deck and strengthen up areas and move things out of the area.
Interestingly,
or something like that.
It's but you can definitely tell, like when you look at it, it's a different color, but it's basically just a really high temp, what we call non-skid. It's just really rough stuff that when it's wet and stuff that you don't slide around.
We have in Australia, we've got the Canberra and I think 2 other ships, whose names I can't remember, that are essentially this sort of ship, but much smaller. We were just comparing before that they are 30,000 tonnes instead of 40,000 tonnes, and about 20 metres shorter, and so on and so forth. We don't have the Harriers, and neither do we have the vertical takeoff and landing F-35s. They've been reserved for the American forces. But I think our decks weren't even built to withstand that sort of thing, to your point. So they even couldn't use them as a platform even for your planes if they wanted to use them, from what I understand.
Not for the F-35. Yeah. And so when I left Boxer, I had made a very compressed workup cycle on it. We can talk a little bit about what the workup cycle is for a ship before it deploys overseas. But we'd made the deployment. We came back and we went through a modernization period, which is a big maintenance period. And that's exactly what we were doing. So we were shifting because the Harriers were really being sundown or going away, and everything was going to F-35s. So we were going through a modernization period to build up the capability to have the F-35s on board that ship, so that when they would deploy again, it would be an entire F-35 squadron.
Right.
And a lot of that's, none of it's really too fancy. I mean, you've got a special coating that doesn't burn up on the flight deck. You put a little strengthening in areas. But really what you're doing is you're taking like cables and stuff that would normally be in the overhead close. You're moving those away so they don't get burned up from just the temperature that occurs when you have those jets trying to take off on the flight deck. So that's really, and then you do some additional special spaces, because some of the information and the avionics, the combat systems in the F-35 are quite advanced. And so they're specially controlled from a information perspective. So you have special compartmental information or special security systems just to manage the combat systems on an F-35.
You mentioned briefly food when you were talking about the transfer of fuel. Up to 2,000 Marines plus their gear on board one of your ships. That's a lot of food.
Plus
those guys eat, don't they?
Yeah. They like to stand in lines and wait for food to be served. And keeping Marines engaged on board a ship is quite a challenge. Fortunately, when you look at it, we used to make a joke that was the coming together of the mafia families. So you had the ship's captain who was in charge of the ship.
Yes.
You also had the squadron commodore. So this is the person that's in charge of all the ships in the squadron.
Yep.
And then you had the Marine colonel that was in charge of all the Marines on board.
Right.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, if it's on the ship, the captain has absolute veto over everything. It's his ship.
Yeah.
It's that absolute accountability and responsibility that command has. But we'd call it you get together the mafia families and you would negotiate and have conversations. And it was joke because we had a great relationship. Like it was really fantastic. But so the Marine colonel is responsible for keeping his Marines busy, but they can only work out so much. Only so much
maintenance they can do on gear.
Maintenance they can do in standing in line. So it is quite a challenge for them. But again, they're just they've got a mission to do, and they do a lot of training. And it was really good having them on there. But they did come up with some unique stuff. As the executive officer, because in our fleet we do it's a program called a Fleet Up. So it's XOCO Fleet Up we call it. So you do your first half of your tour as the executive officer. So you learn the ship, you learn the crew, and the second half
as the commanding officer.
As the commanding officer.
Yes.
So as the executive officer, one of the key responsibilities you have is messing and berthing inspections. So that every day you go around and you check all the messing spaces, make sure they're up to sanitations, expectations, things are going well. If there's any discrepancies, you can fix it, or you can just make sure they're doing well. And you do the same thing with berthing. There's so many berthings on a LHT that you basically break up into segments. And my favorite was always going and talking to the Marines because it was just the most interesting stuff you would see. And it's stuff that's probably not even appropriate you would see. And you're just like, but why? And they're just like, oh, we're just, thought it'd be funny. Yeah, we're bored. And
they're like boxers, aren't they? I mean, they're filled with testosterone and ready to go the whole time.
Pretty much. There is, you look at the Marine Corps stereotype or the stereotype of a Marine, and in the U.S. you watch those commercials, and they've got the knight riding along, and he holds up his Malamute, and lightning strikes it, and they're always talking about the few, the proud. Yeah. That recruits a certain personality of people. So you get a lot of that very gung-ho, very energetic type individuals that want to go and, pound sand on a beach. Yeah. And then you got the Navy folks. And those are your normal complement of your crew. You got 1,200 of them, and you're doing messing. So that's one of the things. It was always interesting interacting with. So I had a lot of interaction with the Marines and the sailors on board, just as the executive officer. And then as the captain, you still have more influence over that as well.
And the pilots, who's responsible for the pilots?
So you have an air boss, but ultimately at the end of the day, so you have an air boss that oversees it. Yep. The Marine Corps have their equivalent, but ultimately it's your air boss that controls. It's like your air traffic control. They're coordinating on that takeoff, their flight schedule. But as a captain, you're responsible for everything that happens on board that ship. And I think that's one of the things that's unique to the military is that when the buck stops, it stops at the captain.
Well, there's got to be ultimate responsibility.
It doesn't matter who it is on the ship. If they fail, what did the captain not do? Did he not make sure that they were trained properly? Did he not hold people accountable? What was the culture? And that's where they always look at first. Like, okay, what kind of environment did you create, captain, to allow that to happen? So the captain's accountable for everything. So anything that happens on the ship is the captain. And the same thing when you work out with the Marine Corps leadership or the colonel in this case, we always had first right of refusal for non-judicial punishment or if a Marine behaved badly. If it happened on the ship, captain has first right of refusal. Now, generally, you go, you take care. You're a person, you take care of them, you deal with it because generally they're probably a lot harder than we would be. Yeah. And so you let them deal with it. But on the ship, the captain's responsible for everything.
So just going back to the logistics of it, you talked about a group that you sail with. How many ships? Because you have to have support vessels, you have to have logistic support, you have to have protection, I imagine, as well. Mm-hmm. So how many ships is in a squadron that what do you call it? A squadron or
a strike group?
A strike group. A strike group.
When they deploy in a squadron, it would be more when they're in their home base.
Yes.
And you'd have different ships in a squadron, and they would all come together, and they would answer to one person. But when you would deploy, only some ships out of that squadron, but they would comprise a strike group. Right. The amphibious strike groups have a tendency to be a little bit smaller than the carrier strike group. So you might have 3 ships. We had an LST, an LPD, and an LHD that deployed with us. The replenishment ships are geographically located, so they'll operate out of a certain theater. Right. And so when we deploy, we'll obviously they know we're coming. We just don't show up on the door and say, "Hey, we're here."
It's all planned.
But it's all planned. Yeah. But then we'll routinely send in what we call a logistics request message, and we'll say, "Here's all the things we need." Mm-hmm. And they'll publish a schedule. Here's when this oiler is available here. And we call them oilers, general, whether they deliver food or oil or not. Most of them can do both. Mm-hmm. And we just say, here's what we need. And they'll say, okay, here's when we can fit it into your schedule. Mm-hmm. And here's where they can meet you. And then you pick a lat long and say, meet at this time and at this location. And that's where you'll do your replenishment.
It's a major job, all of that.
It is a lot of coordination. So you're looking at from across your entire enterprise of what do you need. And they've got it down pretty good. Like your supply officer is your primary person, but they'll also go to the aviation boss and say, how much fuel do you need?
Yeah, yeah.
your fuel bosuns or your bosun's mate that would call your fuel bosun. How much fuel do you need for the current training schedule coming up for flight or aircraft coming up expected? And so you put all that together in a message and you send it off, and then they'll go, here's what we can provide to you and give to you. And yeah, we'll meet them, and then sometimes they're as quick as an hour alongside, and then sometimes there's 3 or 4 hours, if not longer. And it's the most unnatural thing to take two ships are supposed to be apart from each other and put them now to 140 to 200 feet away from each other.
So they can have the cable transferring the fuel and
fuels and helicopters as well.
Helicopters moving gear.
Yeah, so we'll send over fuel lines
Yeah.
and we'll connect those up. And, it just anytime you have ships 200 feet away from each other. And
On a rolling sea, potentially.
On a rolling sea, we've had some pretty sporty days. In fact, the closest I think I ever came to a collision was alongside another ship.
Yeah.
And because it's not natural to be alongside. Normally, you go out to sea and you operate away from them, and you don't get too close to them. But in this case, you have to do it to get the fuel. Yeah. And so you go alongside them, and you bring the fuel on. You get the fuel. Surprisingly, monsters are the most critical in monster drinks. Yeah. You have to have
Monster
those,
drinks.
and those are always the ones that have the highest proliferation, and they have a tendency to come up missing on those things. But it's a huge dance when you do that. But you look at it, and when you look at food service. They have a 21-day menu. So every 21 days, the menu repeats. And you can almost predict it. Like it's almost routine. Like Monday's always kind of been the Asian, maybe a mixed bag day. Tuesday was always Taco Tuesday.
Taco Tuesday.
So it even has, migrated into the civilian world of people saying, hey, it's Taco Tuesday, come out for Taco Tuesday. Yeah. Wednesdays was Slider Wednesday. So Sliders was a nickname for hamburgers.
Hamburgers, yeah.
And then Thursday was Pasta Thursday. Yeah. And then Friday would be like a fish. I guess a little bit of the Catholic tradition coming in. So we always had fish on Friday. And then usually Saturdays were your pub days. Like we call it pub food. You'd have pizza, wings, cheese sticks, that kind of stuff. And then on Sundays, depending on where you're at, and I've had some commands where food was really bad where I just would skip meals. Yeah. And then you had Boxer, we had this award called the NAE Award. And it recognizes the best supply department on that coast. So we had won that my first year there. We'd won the NAE Award. And we always had the best brunch. Like people would come and visit and like, we heard about your brunch. We want to come and have brunch, Sunday brunch with you. Because that was the big thing. But that's also why Monday was usually not such a great day because they only had, like it's zero sum. They only have so much food and allotment. So they'd put it all into Sunday and be like, Monday was a little bit more like, oh, okay, well, you'll pay for it.
Just refry everything.
Clearly a massive catering capacity and crew on board. I mean, we really are doing a deep dive here into how it actually works. But this is and when you think of a Nimitz or Ford class being double the size, so double the numbers. It's a major logistic exercise just to feed the people and to fuel the machine, let alone put the weapons on board when you need them. So how do they arrive? You take a complement. When you're going in a strike group, you know what you're taking with you, but you may be out there, things may not go according to plan. You may need to replenish your munitions. How does that happen?
And it's the same process. We can replenish it at sea, or we can pull into a port and do. Generally, your missiles, you're going to, if you're on one of the smaller combatants, the destroyers, or a cruiser, you're going to pull into port and reload the missile tubes there. So if they went out and shot all their missiles off, they'd pull into port and reload those there. Because you just kind of need the stability when you're putting missiles on there. But a lot of stuff, the ammunition and other stuff, we can get at sea.
The other thing that you mentioned before, LHD is what your boat was, the Boxer. Is it acceptable to call it a boat?
It's a ship.
Ship. So the way to always think about this is ships carry other boats.
Ships carry
other boats. So a boat
boats.
doesn't have another boat on it. But if it's a boat has another boat, it's a ship.
It's a ship.
It's like submarines.
They're
boats.
Submarines are boats because they can't carry another ship.
Yeah, they don't have another boat on it.
Yeah,
ships
right. Carry another boat.
I'm sure there's probably an exception somewhere to that rule, but that's generally the rule is that if it's a ship, it's something that has other boats on it.
So stand corrected. Your ship was an LHD. You mentioned two other classes of the three ships that travel together. There was a
LSD and an LPD. And it's like
LSD is, I'm assuming, not lysergic.
It's landing ship dock. So anything that starts with an L it designates as amphibious.
Yeah.
And then it just happens to be what kind of things they can take on them.
Take on board.
So so you'll spread your assets across the fleet. Like in our case, we could have put all the AH-1 Cobras on board our ship and all this. I mean, the Ospreys and F-35s have to be on the LHD because that's what they're designed for.
Yeah.
But you could put them all onto one, or you could spread them out, and that kind of makes sense. Like if you have an issue with another ship, you don't want to lose all your capability on it. And also, you just don't have the footprint for all that stuff. And so you do spread it out on the other ships, and they have a little bit more specific purposes. But when it gets into the amphibious world, it kind of gets a little bit blurry about what's the difference between an LHC and an LPD and LSD, other than what they can carry. That's really what it boils down to, is what they can carry.
And size, presumably, as well.
In size, yeah. So your LHC is your bigger. It's what you'd call a capital ship. So your nuclear aircraft carriers and your LHC are capital ships. So they're usually what everything revolves around and what everything should protect. So
you don't have any underwater protection with your strike groups?
You could.
Yeah.
And the way that generally happens with submarines is they're considered national assets.
Yeah.
So they're out on national tasking. So they're not assigned to a strike group per se.
Right.
They'll be assigned. They'll probably be in the area. You just don't know about it.
Yeah.
Unless you have a reason for why they want you to establish contacts with them. But they are out there
Alone
and unafraid,
doing their thing,
doing national tasking, doing their mission.
Yeah.
So what I want to ask is a bit more of a personal question about, you're out there in the ocean on the biggest machines that a man has ever built, and you've got thousands of people that you're responsible for as the captain. How do you train for that? Because it's much more of a multidisciplinary task than, say, being the captain of a cruise ship, where you've got people having fun and you've got people cleaning up and
still responsible at the end of the day.
You're responsible for them, but there's no active hostile intent surrounding you, or you're not projecting any of that on a cruise ship. So how do you train up for that command role?
Yeah, I think a lot of it just boils down to experience. So you look at, I was a fresh graduate from the Naval Academy as an ensign. In my first division, I had 42 sailors working for me. And, I'd done a little bit of the peer leadership when I was at the Naval Academy as a company commander and stuff. But when you're actually in front of a division and you're learning that, and I made plenty of mistakes, so leadership mistakes throughout my time, because I constantly always trying to perfect it. And I think anytime you try to perfect leadership, you're going to make mistakes because you figure like, ooh, that didn't really work so well.
But you have to try stuff, right?
But you try stuff, but you also learn. And then each major wicket, as you work through your seniority in the military, you go through additional training. You get additional experience, you get exposed to different environments. So that by the time, and there could be a natural proclivity too, the only people that make it to command are the people that want it. So it's not like everybody gets to just have command. In fact, that's considered really the ultimate position in the Navy, is to have command at sea. That's the epitome. Is if you have command at sea, that's as good as it gets.
It's good to be the king.
And it truly is. It probably is the closest that the U.S. will ever come to having a monarchy is a captain of a ship at sea.
Yep.
But you just kind of get to it. So at the point where you're in command, you kind of already,
you feel it out by then. Yeah.
The things that used to stress you when you were 21 and 22 don't stress you anymore.
Right.
And I wish I'd kept a journal from when I was, 20. Everybody says you should always keep a journal and you go back. And I wish I had, because, you think about the things you deal with now that you're just like, it's not a big deal. You just work through it. But as a 20-year-old, you might have been like, oh my gosh, this is the
it looks like either a cliff or
the
a
world
wall.
is falling apart kind of thing, and so you grow up in that maturity with the experience that comes with it, and just learning, and it's not, it's not like you just walk in there and like I got this and everything's going. In fact, one of the best advice I got going into, and you've probably heard things similar, is like is it better to be good or lucky, and it's like, well, it's better to be lucky, and I had the advice I got was like, you could be the best leader ever. You just take care of your people. You got their respect. You can also be the best ship driver either. You could drive a ship into port without ever using a tug or any hairy situation. But you could be all those things. But if you don't have a lucky bag, none of that matters, because if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, it doesn't matter how good you are. And it kind of goes to that phrase. And so I've always kind of kept in the back of my mind is like, yeah, I think I'm good. But man, I got to make sure
lucky as well.
If it all turns to poo,
and some of it comes out to that timing too, and then you can philosophically you go to the point. Well, what is luck? Just preparation plus opportunity.
Yeah.
So if you need a lucky bag, well, you prepare for it, and if the opportunity presents itself, you can take advantage of it. So, I think if you stressed about everything that could go wrong, you could be held accountable for, because any given day they could have. And the Navy's quite public about their firings. But they're also very deceptive about why. They just say we had loss of confidence in their ability to command. That's as simple as they say. That's all they say. That's the press releases. I lost confidence in their ability to command, and they got relieved.
Yep.
Good luck doing that in the commercial world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is no fair
No.
work in
No,
in
no,
the
there's none of
military.
that. No.
No 3 warnings.
And I was thinking about, when I think about, I was an ensign, I showed up, I had my first division 42, and they said, hey, by the way, here's your collateral duties. You're now the command historian. You're now the public affairs officer. You're now this. And I was like, but I'm an engineer. I'm not a writer. And they're like, you got to do it. And
You'll learn.
and you need to do a weekly news submission every week for the captain to review.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to, well, that's not in my job description. No, I'm not going to do it. You're just like, aye, sir. And you learn to do it. And thankfully, like, because I had to do something I didn't want to do, I actually got to the point where I felt like I'm a fairly good writer these days. And, I've had a couple of articles published in newspapers and magazines and stuff like that. And it's all potentially because I was forced to do
Well,
something I
that's
didn't
part
want
of
to
the
do.
training, stretching you to do the things that you don't necessarily
And
do.
it wasn't fun. There's times I was cursing and it's like, I can't do this. I don't want to do this anymore. I hate this job. But I stuck through it. And after 26 years, I look back, I'm like, wow. Yeah, it wasn't easy, but man, am I
Not
so
supposed
happy
to
that
be.
my life is in a good place because of the challenges, the resilience that I had to build along
So
the way.
that's really interesting. Then we get into somewhat of a philosophical thing. You brought up the topic of how do you train. How do you train to be a competent human being?
Oh, is that to the secret of life or the
The
question?
secret of life, 42.
42.
Yeah, you need those challenges. You need to build that resilience. You need to fail and learn from it. And this is what we're now facing, and it seems to be that we're facing with a couple of generations where they've never really been challenged and they haven't built up that resilience because we've had helicopter parents and what's the other phrase, bulldozer parents who clear the path in front of you. And, everyone gets a participation prize and all the rest of it. And it's like things go a little pear-shaped and it all gets too
Struggle is
hard.
a great teacher.
Yeah, I'll share something that was kind of personal with me is that I was, I guess, a relatively senior lieutenant at the time, and I was doing my department head tour, so operations officer. And this is kind of the point where if you do well, there's a good chance you're going to screen for command. You don't do so well, you're never going to get command. So your career ends at that point. And so there's a lot of pressure riding on your performance. And you start off and you're all gung-ho and like, I'm going to do this stuff. And I ended up just getting into an environment where, good people, but it was challenging. It was stressful. Like I was incredibly stressed out because, it just I was held to account for different things that were out of my control, but because I was, that person, I was the operations officer, and they said, you should have foreseen this happening and stuff. And I remember I also owned our IT system, and our IT system went down over the weekend, and they're like, you're expected to be on the ship until that system gets up. I'm like, but I can't do anything. I'm just the officer. And they're like,
Just got to be there.
Expectations. So it got to a point, and it was just the stress of, a lot of it. And I don't like to point fingers at anybody, and because I definitely had my fair share of probably missteps and stuff like that. But it was just an environment where, on Friday I was, Dale, you're doing an awesome job. You're great. And on Monday it's like, what the hell? Why were you not waiting for me on the quarterdeck when I arrived with this message and stuff like that? And you're just like, but you just said I was, kind of thing. And so it was a lot of that. And I was really stressed. So I remember the phone, every time it would ring, like my heart would race and the stress level. And I just I hated it. I really didn't like it. If I look back on now, it's probably pretty close to that was probably the lowest point. Like it was just stress. I wanted to come home and I was the first person on the ship. I was the last person on the ship, kind of thing. I'd come home and I just want to sit in front of TV and just completely switch off. And my wife would be like, what are you doing? You have a toddler here. You got a 2-year-old girl that wants to see you. You need to snap out of it. I don't care. And then it made me really realize that I needed to focus on my family. Like that was my center of gravity. And so I did that. And I looked for it, and it probably took me about 2 years to really fully get over it. As I look back and reflected, like, what did I do wrong? What could I have done better? And one of the things that struck me is I had not the first captain, but the second captain there goes, Dale, where you been? I'm like, sir, what are you talking about? Like, I'm the one keeping the ship afloat. And he's like, I haven't seen you in 3 days. And it didn't click at the time, but as I reflect on it, I was like, you know what? That's my fault. I wasn't keeping my boss informed of what I was doing. I was doing all this great stuff. And they were completely happy with it.
He didn't know.
But because he didn't know about it, and I didn't give him a chance to say, you know what, I agree or disagree. I was just doing it. And that's the way I was brought up. Actions speak louder than words. And so I was doing it. And then I realized that, wait, that's what actually caused a lot of my problems. I wasn't a good communicator to my boss.
You got to manage up.
I got to manage up.
Yeah.
And so I went into my next tour after I learned that. And I said, you know what? It's unnatural for me just to come into a room and start rambling. I'm going to take my new boss. And I'm just going to go in there and I'm just going to ramble like, hey, here's what I got going on today. Yeah, I had a good breakfast, and then I'm going to go down here, and then I'm going to tour the plane. And crazy enough thing about it is I was incredibly successful. All of a sudden, I went from feeling like I was the scum of the earth And they were a breaking point mentally
Mm.
to the fact that I had learned from that and I become the best communicator. And then after my career just kind of
Mm.
took off, and I think, and I look back on it, it was probably the darkest point of my career as a person. And I think a lot of people would probably have just tapped out or go like, I need a mental health day or something like that. But because I was forced to fight through it, I learned who I was and I learned what environment I can't succeed in. And so now when I see those paths starting to come, like I'm going down that path, like I know how to prevent it. And I think that really builds up the resilience. And I tell people that are like, oh, you've had such a successful career. And it's like, yeah, but I also got tested pretty hard. And I think the surviving of that test is what made me successful going
It's
forward.
not dissimilar in the corporate world. I mean,
It's the same.
yeah, you know,
it's the same
we've
thing.
speaking
Especially the
personally.
phone ringing.
Yeah, but speaking
No,
personally, I mean, I've failed to manage up on occasions and paid the price, but that's the way it is. You know, you learn that you got to do it, and you know, but that's it's again. That test builds stronger character, and in the military, you need that, obviously,
'Cause it's
because you're
life
going
and
to
death.
face situations where you said you're going to need your lucky bag, and if you haven't had those sorts of tests, you're not properly prepared. Just back on the question of the propulsion systems, we said we'd talk about it. Effectively, as we said before, whether you're using gas, whether you're using nuclear, you're creating steam to drive a turbine. Nuclear reactors on ships and boats, being the submarines, have been around for a very long time, since the 50s.
For nuclear,
It's a reasonably, obviously a very mature technology. We've started hearing about, and there's been a lot of work done on small modular reactors, land-based small modular reactors, rather than the traditional big cooling tower plants, the 3 Mile Islands that you see, the Chernobyls or whatever. They're always going to mention the ones that go wrong. Don't know the names of the ones that don't go wrong because there's hundreds of them. SMRs hold the promise, theoretically, of being able to put them either in parallel or serial, I'm not sure which one it is, you can tell us, close to the source of consumption without necessity for being next to a large water source and all those sorts of things. Is that a feasible technology for the future?
I think it is for the future, and I think that's the key word, is the future. If you look at it now, everybody will say, oh, SMR is way too expensive, not viable, not anything. You know, they're what about the waste? What about this? What about that? You know, they're not being cheaply made now. And I think if we all look at technology and history, like things that were incredibly expensive back in the 60s are not so. I mean, we all have our phones, our smartphones. But look at the first IBM computer in the 70s. Like it filled up an entire room and there's millions of dollars. And now you can go out and buy something more powerful than that for several $100s, a few $100s. So I guess, you know, the optimist in me always says that when humanity sets its mind to something, it figures out a way to make it cost effective. So SMRs are relatively new. Yes, they're incredibly expensive to start up. Is there viability going forward in the future? Yeah, maybe, you know, maybe we'll figure out the secret of fusion as well. And that could potentially be a completely different game we're talking about. But is it viable? Potentially, yes, in the future, because we've got to invest in it. And if you never invest in it, then it's never going to be viable. And it's the same thing with waste. You know, so as I've talked to a lot of people about nuclear power, nuclear propulsion in Australia, they all go, what about the waste? And I'm like, that's always the biggest concern. You've got stuff that sticks around for thousands of years. Where do you put it? Well, I mean, you could make the argument, well, there's a lot of vast unpopulated area in Australia. You could put it anywhere. But I also know that there's research going on into recycling that material. So you start off with something that can only work for so long in let's say a naval nuclear submarine. It works for so long, and once it gets depleted down a level, maybe you get it over to somebody that can recycle that, and they can turn it into an SMR, and then it is using an SMR until eventually it doesn't have it. Does that technology exist today? Not necessarily at cost, but could it exist in 10, 15 years? Yeah, if there's SMRs are truly a thing in the future, somebody's going to figure out a way to make money out of it. That's how capitalism works. Somebody figures out how to wring every dollar they can from the life cycle of something, because letting it just pollute the environment is no longer the environment we're in.
But the total amount of waste, I read somewhere, from all nuclear reactors so far used by humankind is not as huge as people think. So I read somewhere you could fit it all into one large aircraft hangar.
Yeah,
from what I understand. So it's a question. It's also a question that becomes it becomes like the bogeyman, yeah?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, the waste is the problem, the waste is the problem. Well, you know, the waste might be an issue of a container load in 50 years' time, by which time we've probably figured out something to do with it, you know, but it's not that volume that scares, that people are scared by the idea of it. And again, we're scared by the exceptions rather than the rules. So we've had, if we looked at the number of deaths caused by nuclear power plants, the Chernobyl one is opaque. We don't know because, of course, it was the Soviet Union. Nobody tells you what was going on. We don't really know what the long term. But in terms of the actual deaths on site, they weren't in the thousands. We're talking dozens rather than hundreds.
Yeah.
What are the long-term effects? We still don't know. They've got that exclusion area around the thing. 3 Mile Island, there weren't any, as I understand. And in Japan, with their accident, they've also now got an exclusion zone, I think, around that plant that they.
I thought they were restarting it.
Yeah, they are interested in it. Like, we're going back in there and starting it because they realize that nuclear power is actually a pretty viable energy source.
Yeah, but they haven't. I mean, longitudinally, maybe there's a cancer effect or whatever that we don't know, but there aren't any huge numbers of direct deaths. But it's always pointed up as a bogeyman because you have a few cases that get that huge exposure. But would we stop flying because we lose a couple of passenger jets a year if we have a bad year? We don't.
Yeah, and I think the one way to look at it is the amount of nuclear accidents out there that's the extreme nuclear accident. Like, we design plants so they don't, and they continue to get better and better with technology. So one of my roles when I was on the George Washington, so this is I was a reactor training assistant. So I was responsible for all 450 people in this department, of their training, their certification, level of knowledge, about all that. And once a year we had to simulate a reactor accident.
Right.
So you have to go through it because it could happen. I mean, it's a very small chance, but you have to simulate. So you have to go through the addition or the issuing of potassium iodide and train your team. But the amount of things I would have to basically, it's almost had to create a fictitious scenario. Okay, well, this safety system didn't work. It failed. And by the way, we had this other safety system was up for maintenance. And then this other thing happened. And the operator that we spent a lot of time and energy into training just didn't carry out any of their actions.
Yeah, he was
That's
gone that day.
That's how we got the accident. And by the way, we operated the ship at a really high power before we pulled in, so it was already really hot core. So everything was just set up perfectly to create it. As you start going there, like, this just isn't realistic.
Yeah.
Like, the plants, the propulsion plants are designed to be stable. They're designed to be safe. They're not like nuclear weapons, which are designed to blow up. These are designed to be safe, like not to have a reactor accident. And that technology going into it, and it gets better and better every day, makes them incredibly safe. So when you look at Chernobyl, and again, it's opaque, when you look at some of the other stuff, most of it was operator error. Or the entire system. And I think that's one thing that I will always appreciate about my exposure to the nuclear Navy is it really teaches you to look at the system perspective. Not just that one thing, that smoking gun that happened. How did everything else influence? How did I, as a leader, affect that person and make a mistake? Why did that person lie or not do something correctly in their lungs? Or why did that system fail? And so you're always looking at that environment. And, it to the most part, it's true is that components in a nuclear power plant, and we're talking just the primary side, so the side that has radioactive liquid potentially that it's exposed to, they know from where it was mined all the way till it's disposed. They can trace it all back so that there's a defect or deficiency in it. They can go back and analyze that. And that's very similar to some of your ISO, your AS9100 types. And it goes into aviation has actually learned quite a bit from that. Is you can go back and find out why was there a defect in that. And looking at that system perspective, was it somebody had a bad day? Were they fatigued? Or was the metal that we got maybe passed this test, but we should have run another test on it?
So back to your deployment as the commander of the Boxer, you were in the Persian Gulf. Now, your last year of command was 21?
21.
21.
So I left command in February 21.
Did you find any pirates?
So we'd see them, routinely, but, we actually, the only time I can ever remember having an interaction with a pirate was we heard a Mayday call for piracy, and we got to Latin Long, and by the time we got there, like, it's gone. It's just,
gone.
We were too far away, but we law of the sea requires you to render assistance if you can, and we're like, hey, we hear a mayday call.
We go.
Somebody's being attacked by pirates, and we try to go there, and yeah, there's nothing left. And that was actually in the South China Sea.
South China Sea.
Yeah,
Oh, so they're
because you got off of like
'cause
the
they're
Straits of
active
Malacca
through
and
there as
stuff.
well,
Yeah.
aren't they? Straits of Malacca and yeah.
Yeah, and in the Gulf of Thailand, that's where we
Yeah.
see most of that stuff. And,
Yeah.
and when we were operating off of Africa, really was kind of had quieted down from the heyday of that going on. But yeah, the Boxer was famous for Captain Phillips.
Yes, Captain Phillips.
And
yeah.
his rescue. So that was the Boxer that was the LHC or the command platform for that.
Speaking of LHDs, so recently there was a very effective, whether you agree with the politics of it or not, but there was a very effective operation in Venezuela to go into a capital city to extract the leader, who's well protected by not only his own forces but Cuban forces as well, in a protected compound with a safe room, pull the bloke out and not lose a single one of your troops or combatants, and fly him out to land on a sister ship of the Boxer, which I think I forget the name now.
Iwo
Jima. You said it was a slightly newer one though, wasn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, with the new propulsion system.
I think that I'm vague on which number,
No,
but it
gas.
transitions from the gas,
Yeah.
from the steam boiler to the gas turbine.
So the Navy had sent the Ford into the Caribbean, or the Caribbean as you call it, the Caribbean, but it was the Iwo Jima that went in close enough, from what I can understand, to launch the attack. Or there would have been a number of places the attack would have been launched from, the operation would have been launched from. But that's a remarkable projection of power and of capability.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree.
yeah. But how much planning would have gone into that?
Oh, it's extensive planning, and not only that, the rehearsals that go with it. So you plan it out, you create the idea, concept. You get people go to school to learn how to plan these operations, and they get really good at it. And I think just that experience of getting all these planners and doing operations like that, and then they rehearse it till there is no question. Like when you're talking. What the public knows them as Delta Force, or even the SEAL Team 6 or the Special Development War Group, DevGru folks, they rehearse so much, so there is no question about what somebody's going to do on the team. They do it, and then they plan for the unexpected, and that's what makes them so good. Is they just rehearse, and they go, what if this and what if that? And they get it down to a science, and things can go wrong. Look at Bin Laden, they had a helicopter that actually
went down.
Yeah, it went down.
Yeah.
And they had already said, okay, if this happens, we're going to blow it up with charges so we can't get in. And then here's how the other team's going to get out. So they work through those contingency plans. And you just sit there and you could call it basically wargaming, the scenario, but that's what you do. You train, and rehearse.
So by the time it's actually there's muscle memory.
It's mostly muscle memory. Because you think about it from that point, everything's happening very quickly. And if you have to sit there and stop and think about everything, you're probably not going to survive, or you're not going to execute in a timely manner. So it almost has to be like you have to be able to execute it as muscle memory. And there's a lot of intelligence to go. As the CIA had a big part to play.
Yeah.
And so they had operatives, some people, from what I understand in the press, is feeding information about where he's located at this time of day, and the term pattern of life.
Yeah. And the same thing would have happened with Iraq with the B-2 strike on the nuclear facilities. Iran.
These Arab countries, don't
Those countries, they're all next to each other.
Yeah.
Anyway, no, Iran with the nuclear facilities buried in the mountain. They must have had inside information to know where is this stuff, where is it buried, how do where's the access points, and of course lots of satellite, but that's not the same as having an asset on the ground, surely.
No, I think the asset on the ground. So there's things I can't really talk about too much, but I've seen some facilities where they had stuff mapped out very well, and you're like, wow, this is like 3D, virtual reality.
So they know.
So with that being said, you also understand what they don't know, and that's just because you realize that sometimes they don't know. Good guess, and sometimes they have incredible intelligence and stuff like that, and you just intel is only as good as it's relevant and useful. So, when you look at the intelligence world and you look at the capability, wow, that's really impressive. But then you also look like we just don't know everything.
Right.
So with the shape of warfare or hostile acts, projection of power, whatever, it's been typically said that armies military forces are always well prepared to fight the last war.
Yep.
We've seen in the last 2 to 3 years how the nature of warfare is changing due to, particularly in Ukraine, with the use of drones, smart drones or dumb drones or whatever, and the manpads and the is it the Hellfire missiles that the shoulder fired.
Yep.
Maybe not. It's not
Stinger
Hellfire.
missiles.
Stingers. Thank you. So does that change the necessity for a huge floating city as a means to project power? Can it be done without inserting Marines or SEALs or whatever, just by using machines that are disposable?
I think that's definitely the future. You know, if you look at, and it's true, admirals and generals are always fighting the last war. You can look at the whole evolution of the aircraft carrier. For example, World War II, battleship reigned supreme until Japan attacked Pearl Harbor and sunk all the battleships for the most part. And then all of a sudden they realized, well, these aircraft carriers actually have a point. And they ended up becoming the focal point. You could argue now that with submarine warfare and, you know, China's got what they call the carrier killer ballistic missiles, the DF-21s, and those that can reach out, you know, 2,000 miles and take on an aircraft carrier. They really are quite what they used to be. You know, when you're talking about a near-peer adversary like China and Russia, they potentially are vulnerable. But in the meantime, they still project a lot of force while they can. So, you know, it is a future.
It's a deterrence aspect to it.
There is a part. So when we look
deterrence.
at like the missions of the Navy, part of it is deterrence and show the flag and that presence. So, you know, people's calculus changes when they see an amphibious strike group off their coast, or they
With
see
all
an
the
aircraft carrier.
planes on
Like
the
all of a
deck.
sudden they go, maybe I should tone down my
Yeah.
rhetoric. Maybe I should be a little
That's
bit
an
more
awful
compliant.
lot of stuff coming at you, isn't it?
Gunboat diplomacy.
Yeah,
it's
it really
it's
is.
very
And
famous.
so that's part of that presence and showing the flag, and they see it and they say, hey, we're in the neighborhood, so like
Yeah,
you
we thought
might
we'd
want to
drop in.
behave yourself.
Well, the
Yes.
Chinese did that to us the year before last.
Yeah, they let you know, but you know, I think the future
Last year.
is uncrewed. You know, think about how, and that's almost scary if you think about that. If you get into uncrewed, and all of a sudden now it doesn't matter what
Different
wins and losses
morality,
are.
though.
It's a different morality. Okay, so if a machine dies, who cares? So does that make warfare easier to wage? Because now we go, oh, do we want to send our sons and daughters to fight?
Right. So that raises the inevitable question that we've asked before on this podcast with other experts in this field. Are we building the submarines for the past or the future?
The AUKUS.
Let's assume we actually get Virginia class
Yep.
hybrid Virginia.
I think you
class.
will.
Yeah.
You know, I'm
Yeah,
confident
yeah,
you will.
Yeah. So it's just if we get them, by the time we get them, have we got them for the past, or we haven't got them for the future or the present?
I think, you know, when it comes to submarines, like if you were to buy a nuclear aircraft carrier, you had an AUKUS program for, you know, pillar, I don't know, 4 or something
Yes,
to
yes.
acquire Nimitz class aircraft carriers.
Yeah.
I say you're probably not spending your money very wisely. But
Yeah.
nuclear submarines, that's still an asymmetric advantage that the West has.
Hmm.
Our submarines are still very good. And the U.S. Virginia class submarines are very, very good.
They're huge.
That-
And
That's
so
why-
that's a strategic advantage. So if
Yeah.
Australia gets that, and granted, it may be a 30 or 40 year type technology before it's completely obsolete. Who knows? Maybe we'll have the, you know, robots in the seas and the air and on the land fighting. But, you know, as you've gone along that journey, you've got something that's incredibly capable, but it's still very relevant in today's age because it can operate. It's not limited to the shores.
Anywhere.
You can operate it anywhere. You're really limited to food stores and with dehydration and canned goods and all that stuff. You can operate for a long time. It's just a matter of what quality of life do you want to give yourself.
So one of the
exactly. Yes.
So just to your point about the deterrence, one of the, as you say, asymmetrical. One of the things of having, I think we're supposed to have 8,
I think 4 is
4
what we,
initially, yeah. But anyway,
but eventually you'll build up to 8 when you
yeah.
actually do the
When we
AUKUS,
build them.
the AUKUS submarine.
yeah. Let's say you get to the point where you've got 6 or 8 of these things, right? The fact that an adversary doesn't know where they are, and they could actually be right off that adversary's coast, is a bit of a deterrent, I would have thought.
Oh, absolutely. We always talk about it in like mine warfare.
Yeah.
They don't have to put a mine in the water, but if they tell you to mine there, all of a sudden you're going to change everything you do
Yeah.
because they're incredibly hard to detect.
Yeah.
It can cause a lot of damage, and they're very cheap to do that.
Yeah.
Same thing with a submarine. If you know a submarine's operating in the area, all of a sudden you're going to be like, okay,
Yeah.
maybe I can't just operate. Maybe I do
Yes.
need to see alert. And oh, by the way, what capability do I have at detecting a submarine? Ooh, if you're on an LHC, not very good.
Not good.
You have helicopters.
Yes.
Well, they have only so much time they can stay up in the air and kind of keep it. So you have to coordinate with other assets to make sure you get those capabilities to detect a submarine, because otherwise you're not.
So
and that takes resource away from let's say, a hostile strike group that you might be trying to launch.
Yeah,
We're not
potentially.
naming anyone,
Yeah.
rather like the Tom Cruise movie. We're not naming anyone.
Yeah.
They're black planes.
Yes.
And I think Clausewitz talked about the fog of war.
Yeah.
And it's all about, like, you can plan it all you want, but the fog of war kind of gets a vote.
Mm.
The more you can increase that fog,
Mm.
the more successful you're going to be. So if you can just say, oh, we got a submarine operating out there,
Mm.
not going to tell you where it is, not going to tell you what it's armed with, but now all of a sudden you're going to be like,
Mm.
what do we do about that?
So are you constantly, as the captain of a amphibious assault ship, are you constantly watching for hostile submarine activity around you? Or
So we
around the
would
strike
do a
group?
daily intelligence brief, and so they would get all that downloaded from the fleet commanders. They would produce. Hey,
That's
here's-
essentially
and some of the intel was pretty good. Like we saw the submarine located in this port on this day. It got underway. We think this is the path it's taken because this is typically their pattern of life.
right.
Historically, where they patrol, or we don't know where it's going. It's something to be alerted. It could be in your area by this time, based upon the speed of advance and typically how far they go. So we would do a daily brief on intel, and then we'd also talk about other operations going on and stuff like that. So we'd have a daily ops intel is what we call operations and intelligence.
Ops Intel. All these wonderful abbreviations in the
Yes.
military that it's just you can geek out for hours on the whole lot. Back on the question of rehearsal and planning and the Venezuela thing, what the Operation Enduring Freedom?
Freedom back in Panama.
That was Bush Senior, wasn't it?
Yeah, so that would have been 88.
So it would've been
Yeah, that
end
would have
of
been
Reagan?
that would have
Yeah.
been
It was
Bush
Reagan's
at
last
the end of
year, wasn't
Reagan,
it? End of- end
after
of-
Reagan. But those sorts of operations you mentioned, rehearsal. How long before does the planning start? I mean, to us, we read the newspaper or we see it on the internet and in the news. We go, oh, the Americans have done this. Well, Trump must have just decided yesterday. No, because this needed a whole lot of planning.
Yeah.
So I'm imagining that there must be multiple operations that are in the planning that never come to fruition.
Oh, absolutely. Like we
Yes.
have plans for a lot of contingencies, and
Yes.
it's just a matter. Sometimes they're maybe almost a straw man.
Yeah.
And you'd put together and say, okay, well, it's not this specific leader,
Yeah.
but it's a leader. How we take out, how we coordinate, and that starts a point. Then you start looking at the specifics of that.
Yeah.
And we call them O plans, operations plans, and
Yeah.
stuff like that. We have all kinds for pretty much every scenario in the world. And it's interesting. Not necessarily related to that, but when I was on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I was a strategic planner for that, and one of my responsibilities was the chairman's risk assessment. So every year we do this big risk assessment of the world. We do, here's what's developing, the strategic side, here's what's evolving, developing in the world, and then here's what our military capability, and we look at that gap analysis of what is our military could do. And so we'd pulse all the leaders throughout the world. We'd take U.S. leaders, geographic and combatant commanders and stuff
Yeah.
like that. We'd ask them, what's your biggest concerns? And it was interesting is that it was always like the pandemic, COVID,
Yeah.
was identified back in 2010. We're like, this is a big top three. There's going to be a global pandemic,
Yeah.
and here's all the things we can do. And I think we saw, and like Northcom, Northern Command, so basically responsible for North America, had plans on how to do a COVID, a pandemic type outbreak, and we would plan for that. But then, you see where that probably only got a little bit of a cursory planning. They do an
Yes.
exercise and call
Yes.
it good versus going in and taking a leader of another country or something like that. But we have plans for a lot
Yeah.
of that stuff. It's just about the fidelity of it. And some of them are
And then
years
you
in
can
development.
you can adjust that plan to the circumstance.
Yeah.
So the political decision gets made, and it comes down to the Joint Chiefs. In this case, it's Mr. Kane, General Kane, and he would no doubt to go to his people and say, "What have we got in the
bag?"
drawer
Yeah.
that we can modify to do this?"
I think one of the key things is the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the chairman of Joint Chiefs. He's an advisor to the president
Yep.
in that role, and Secretary of Defense. So he's not actually in the operational chain of command.
Right.
So when it came, if the president said execute this order, it wouldn't be the chairman issuing.
No, but the chairman has to go to the people who are
So
going
they
to
go
do
to
it.
the Secretary of Defense. He would go to the combatant commander,
Yeah.
but there would be definitely that coordination, and
Yeah.
because the Joint Chiefs of Staff would do a lot of that inter-service coordination, and they'd have a planning cell working on that.
Yeah,
But he wouldn't be actually in the operational chain
No.
of command.
What you're saying is that the operational people would have a sort of plan for this contingency, and then say, well, we can modify that, but it's going to take X amount of time to rehearse it because now we've got to get the intel about the specific location and so on and so forth. If you don't have it already, one assumes, yeah. And there's on the ground preparation needs to happen because there's obviously going to be insurgents on the ground who are going to be preparing whatever they need to prepare. So the ramp you talked earlier about your preparation time for a strike group.
Mm-hmm.
So these things are not of the moment; they take a bit of planning.
They do, and so generally we'd go on a 24-month cycle. So you'd have, the first 6 months would be a maintenance or fix things. These are very complex pieces of machinery. You'd fix it, do maintenance on it. Things just wear down, and you need to have the ship available for 6 months to fix it because it's very intrusive. And then you have about anywhere from 10 to 12 months of a workup. So this is where you train it. And you start out very basic level, just getting the rust off of them. And then you start working up as a strike group. You'll start working together, and you get more and more complex scenarios. And then you'll get certified to deploy. And then the last 6 months of that 24-month cycle is that you'd actually be deployed. I will tell you that that's notional because I had very seldomly ever experienced that. When I was on Theodore Roosevelt and also on Boxer, both of them very different reasons, but we always had a very compressed workup cycle. It was like you're coming out of like in the Boxer's case, they were coming out of a maintenance period, and then somebody had connected shore power, so the electrical system had connected in the wrong polarity. So
Shocking.
it basically caused this huge fire. So basically, instead of 24 months, because it was a fairly large modernization, instead of being 24 months, it was almost a year, 3 years out of service. So all that crew, none of them most of them hadn't even gotten underway. They didn't have any deployments under it. And so you get there and they're like, you're now a national asset. We need to maintain carrier presence in the Arabian Gulf. You're tasked with doing that. You've got 10 months to get the ship and crew ready. And so you come with that enormous task.
You're replacing somebody else.
Yeah, we could explore so much about leadership and everything else on that. And I know that's not the topic, but you have a crew that hasn't experienced and they've constantly had a setback. Are we going to deploy? Everybody say, hey, we're deploying here. Yeah, right. We'll see it when it happens. And to get them ready in 10 months, and then we were deployed for 7 months. And then we came back and went to another modernization. So, but that's the notional, is that you have this maintenance period where, your crew kind of gets separated a little bit. You still have the crew who owns the ship.
So what happens to the crew? The Marines go off and do whatever they do, but your 1,200 sailors?
1,200.
1,200 sailors that you've got on board, X number stay on board to keep things moving, I guess, engineers and people like that, and somebody to feed them, one assumes, and a small relatively small complement. What happens to the rest of them? They go off and do other training, or they get deployed elsewhere?
So part of that is it, but I think it's almost very similar to the business world.
Yeah.
You only have a pool of people. So on a ship, you'll have your wartime manning, which is fully everything's up. You're ready to go out and fight a war. And then you have your normal kind of manning. And that says, I require this many electricians. I have this many quartermasters for navigation. I have this many people for this. And they say, and the bureau personnel who handles all the manpower, our big HR department says, that's all great, that number, we'll try to fill that. But we can only fill you with your fair share of what pool of people are available. So if every ship has a requirement for 10 quartermasters and there's let's say 3 ships and you need 30 quartermasters, but there's only 24, you're going to say, okay, each ship gets 8. Unless you're deploying. So there is a priority level. So when you first come back from deployment, you're now the lowest priority. So your sailors now become available to go off to a ship that's getting ready to deploy so they can fill it up to that number.
Right.
So there is a lot of that. So
redeployment.
About a third of your crew turns over a year, or not a year, but in that cycle, you'll lose about a third of your crew.
Wow, that's a leadership
In the maintenance
task.
period, it can be even more because all of a sudden now you're the low priority, and a lot of your sailors be like, we need a cook on board the ship. They're getting underway. And you go, hey, I know you just got back from deployment, but you're getting underway again, you need to deploy again, kind of thing. So they're constantly managing that from that perspective, but you still have the crew there. It's probably one of your more leadership challenged environments because you have a crew that's trained to go to sea and to do all this stuff, and now they're in port. They're wearing hard hats. Generally, the power is secured, so there's no air conditioning, there's no heating. It's cold, it's loud because, metal just doesn't absorb sound very well. So if somebody's doing work up forward, you can hear it all the way out. It's just a really tough time. So what happens is a lot of sailors have a tendency to get in trouble because they get bored. And as young sailors will, when they're bored and a pocket full of money, they go out and get in trouble. So it's typically one of the more challenging. Like if I could avoid a maintenance period, I would. But unfortunately, they're a necessary evil we do. And there's ways we did it on the Boxer. We actually had a very successful maintenance period with very little issues. And we just came up with a peer-led program. So they would motivate each other to stay out of trouble. And it was as simple as if somebody in your division or your little group that we divide them up to got in trouble, you wouldn't get a day off, but everybody else could get a day off. And so every month
That's
you
a
have
bit of
day
peer
off.
that's
pressure.
always good.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
great because
Yeah.
you're like, well, this is an experiment. I'm going to try this out and see how it works. So
Yeah.
you roll this out, and everybody's like, I don't know how it works. But then after, like, I think the first month we rolled it out, we had 90 people come in out of we're probably down to 1,000 at that point because we're in the main spirit. 90 people come in for I called them We Are Boxer Days.
Yeah.
You know, they would come in for a We Are, and it wasn't just that you had to sit on the ship and do nothing. We had chaplains coming in and speaking to them. We had drug and alcohol prevention.
Yeah.
We had somebody teaching them how to write essays.
Yeah.
And we had a legal person come in. So it was actually more about positive
Yeah.
reinforcement. And we did it in the second month we did that. We had one division of people, I think maybe 20 come in.
Yeah.
Third month we had 2 divisions come in, so about 40.
Yeah.
And then after that it was zero.
Yeah.
And you could get the feedback because people were like, yeah, we just did quarters this morning. And we said, don't screw this up because
Yeah.
I've got plans for that day
Yeah.
off.
Yeah. Do not.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it really was
Yeah,
this
yeah.
peer pressure led
Yeah.
system because I think we all know this from a leadership perspective. You can only lead so much from the top and tell
Yeah.
people don't do this. And,
Yeah.
even as a parent, you tell your kids to not do something. It
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean they won't do it. But if you can get the peers to enforce it.
Yeah.
And then, so we ended up doing quite well during the
That's an
maintenance period.
excellent
But yeah.
way of doing it. Yeah.
So I have a question that I've canvassed amongst a few of my colleagues, and everybody wants to know, how do you reverse park an aircraft carrier?
Oh,
Is it any damn way I feel like? Or
no. So, we do training to do that.
Yeah.
But, it's incredibly hard because now, the forward end of the ship is pointy, so it cuts through the water.
Yeah.
The rear end of the ship, it's square.
It's
for the
square.
most part.
Yeah. It
And
also
so it doesn't
opens out,
behave.
doesn't it?
And
Yeah.
it's completely different.
Yeah.
I'd say so I was on I had a command of a littoral combat ship, which is one of the gas turbine water jet propulsion, like absolutely fun, like a huge jet ski on water, and you could go 42 knots.
Are those the ones that are built in Tasmania?
No, but Austal makes
Austal.
one variant of it.
yeah.
Austal
We had
make one
the,
it's
very.
very smooth side.
A trimaran.
there's a
isn't it?
trimaran. They had
Trimaran.
another version. I was on the monohull version that was
Monohull,
being
yeah,
built
yeah.
by Figatari up in Wisconsin, but absolutely fun ships to drive with the water jets going 42 knots.
How do they get them from Wisconsin to the sea?
Great Lakes.
Great Lakes. Yeah, you
so
just
they cruise
through the St. Lawrence
Yeah,
waterways.
yeah.
Yeah.
But that's where you learn because they really spend a lot of money teaching us how to drive those, and you realize that when you're trying to drive a stern, because it's square.
It doesn't
It's
do.
but then also if you look at a ship, the rudders,
Yeah.
your rudders add control because you got thrust going past them, so they're just like an airplane wing. But when you're going in reverse, you don't have that water going.
Yeah.
So now you almost use your rudders as a water brake,
Right.
so it pushes around. So it can be done. Can be very challenging, and on an aircraft carrier, you're going to use tugs anyway because it's a national capital. You're not
You're not
nobody's
gonna-
going to go out there and be like, no, I don't want any tugs.
yeah,
on
I
this
can park this.
because it's just honestly, it's not worth it.
Yeah, yeah.
Your ego of saying I parked this without tugs
Yeah.
just isn't realistic. It's too big. Wind affects it too much. Current. Why take the risk? We've got a big defense budget for a reason. That's because we can afford tugs.
Yes.
So use the tugs to push you up here.
Tell me, as the captain on the bridge, you don't physically control the ship unless you want to.
Right.
Right. There's a what's the name of the person who drives the ship
Oh,
literally?
I just drew a blank.
Yeah, that's right.
helmsman.
The helmsman.
Yeah.
Yeah, the helmsman. So like the Starship Enterprise,
Yeah.
it's make it
So
so,
it's
and off you.
sitting
And
there with a big wheel?
helmsman does what
Yep.
needs
So
to
you
happen.
generally have a throttleman and a helmsman. And,
Yeah.
And you have an officer at deck.
Yep.
So as a captain, you're kind of just generally sitting there. You have an officer at deck that's responsible, but you have a conning officer.
Yeah.
So there's multiple layers. So the conning officer is actually responsible for giving orders to the helmsman
Yeah.
and the throttleman to say
Yeah.
increase the speed or turn the ship this way. With that being said, usually the conning officer is a fairly junior person. They might have more experience, but the officer at deck is sort of telling them what to do. But then as a captain, if it's a really kind of challenging situation in port, you might be able to like, I've seen some captains are very directive. Okay, come right 5 degrees and come right 5 degrees, kind of thing. And they just parrot.
Yeah.
And what I always try to do is like that was never good if I'm parroting everything because the only person learning how to become a good driver at that point is me.
Mm.
So let me teach people and let them, give them some left and right limits.
Yeah,
Let them
yeah,
go and
yeah.
see how they do. And that's what I always try to do. So just listen, then be like, hey, you might want to think about this. Oh yeah, kind of thing. If you can, very seldomly do you ever need to take control. I think I mentioned earlier during an underway replenishment, it's probably the closest I'd ever came to a collision, and we were operating off Oman, and it was a very stormy day, like 15-foot seas, probably 30 to 40. Like we were right at the upper limit for even doing helicopter replenishment because if it gets too windy, you can't do it. So we were right up the upper limit. and we were doing 3 ships. So we were alongside the oiler. Oiler's in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
As the other ships started coming along the other side,
Mm.
and I'm sitting there watching it. And I was the executive officer at the time, but I was the surface warfare. So I was a ship driver. The other guy in the Navy, LHD, swapped between helicopter pilots
Mm-hmm.
and surface warfare.
Mm-hmm.
So the helicopter pilots, so it's every other one. So the captain was a helicopter pilot. I was the surface warfare. So I was really kind of overseeing ship maneuvers alongside this other ship. And this other ship is coming alongside. And all of a sudden, I look and like it's just getting really close. And you're just like,
Maybe you couldn't see you.
oh, well, it almost gets to that point. So we had this, we put it's phone and distance lines, what we call it, but it's got markings on it every yard or every meter on it, and we could tell how far away we are, or it's every feet how far we are. So all of a sudden, I see this thing just start ratcheting. I'm like, what is going on? Like we've done nothing, and you're constantly when you're alongside another ship, there's high pressure and low pressure systems. So it's kind of like you're playing with these bubbles in the water, and you're trying to balance them to stay in there because you're constantly adjusting. And amazingly, you want the ship here if you want to go to the left, you actually have to steer your right midships. Yeah. Or you might have to steer it at it. Like you actually turn it, but because you're right on the bubble, it pushes up. All of a sudden, the ship starts really closing us. And I'm like, what do I, it's like one of these things. This is where all that experience pays off. And you go, stay calm, stay calm, stay calm. If I panic and they hear panic in my voice, that helmsman's going to hear panic. I'm just like, all right. I think we're doing like maybe it's right 3 degrees rudder or something like that. I'm like, rudder midships. I'm just like, oh, please catch. And the ship's still closing in. And you're just like, all right, left 1 degree rudder. Because you just got to walk it down. And it's so calm. And you walked in, and all of a sudden the spacing opened up. And everything turns to normal. And we call over to the other ship, like, what happened? What kind of thing? They're like, what are you talking about? I was like, you guys got really close to us. They're like, no, we didn't. It's like, yeah, you guys got really close to
Well, the fact that they didn't know they were getting close to you.
Well, the other ship had a propulsion. They lost a shaft. They lost one of their engines on their shaft, so they're 2 shaft. And they had started closing them. And you could imagine the human nature. All of a sudden, this other ship's closing. They all look over there. They're not even looking at us anymore.
Oh, they're
so they're starting to close us.
Yeah, so
And so we're doing every time you do a big operation, you always do a hot wash. Like it's good practice, and we always made it through. And I remember our airboats' mate come up, prior enlisted officer comes up and he goes, "Sir, what happened?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "I was on the aircraft elevator." And he goes, "I was looking down on top of the other ship." Yeah. I say, "Yeah, they got a little close." And everybody's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, "Yeah, it got really close." And they're like, "We had no idea." Because, you just kept it calm. And that helmsman they're generally junior sailors. They're good at what they do, but they're junior sailors. And if I had panicked and the thing you got to be worried about, those rudders, you can swing into the other ship and cause a collision. So when you got something closing like that, you just got to do your best to walk it out there.
I don't think people, certainly we don't as landlubbers, really understand just how difficult it is to control a large ship, a boat full stop, but a large ship, because you've actually got no control unless you're moving anyway.
It's like being on ice.
Right?
Yeah.
So you got to be moving in order to control the thing. So my only experience of it is the jet ski, right? And the jet ski, the usual mistake that people make that they fall off is they stop power and try and steer it, and the thing just falls over. Yeah. Because there's no power. There's no power. But it's on a massive scale, a 40,000 ton scale. That's what you're talking about. The thing's got to be moving, and you've got to be doing the equivalent of what we talk about in rally driving, which is look at the gap rather than don't look at the obstacle, look at the gap.
Yeah. And when you're also looking at that, it's like, okay, if I want to stop, let's say I see something here, it's got to be like 3 lengths of the ship away. Yeah. Or I'm not stopping. I'm hitting. Like there's just so much momentum. Yeah. And so even if you tried backing it down as much, you're just going to keep moving through the water at that size. Yeah.
So if you're doing top speed of 25 miles an hour, 41 kilometers an hour.
Well, that's
theoretical, whatever. 22 knots. How long does it take to stop from that speed?
If you're doing full back emergency, because we get tested on this as part of the workup to make sure you can
like
do
a
it.
crash stop type
thing. It seems like it's really short distance, but it's longer, but like within seconds.
Yeah?
Yeah. Like it's not like 2 minutes later, you're like, okay.
We're still going.
Like when you do a crash back, like you don't do it very often. You do it as part of the training.
It's kind of good for the structure of the ship.
Sea trials. Yeah. But like things start like it starts bouncing up and down. And like we used to do it on the aircraft carrier all the time. And that was fun because now you have 4 shafts. Mm-hmm. And with the nuclear power plants, like you could...
They're going flat neck and trying to pull you back.
You could exercise the nuclear power plants. And you're talking 100,000 shaft horsepowers. So you could be like... And we do it all the time at night because during the day they would do flight operations. So for us to do our training and proficiently, we do casualty drills at night, usually 3 o'clock in the morning to 6. And so we'd do crash backs. We'd always do them through a maneuvering transit where they had to go flank, as fast as we could. And then we'd have them do we never do crash back because you had to limit it, but you could do a back full. And even then, as those props start to bite in the water, like the whole ship starts bouncing. You're talking 96,000 tons starts bouncing in the water. Yeah. And you're like, yeah, that's some power right there. It was fun.
So you'd obviously have no aircraft on the deck at that stage.
No, you wouldn't.
You would?
They'd be just chalked and chain. You wouldn't be moving them.
They're all locked down.
Okay. Yeah, you would what we call chalk and chain, have them secured to the deck.
Yeah.
If you were moving them, then it's actually quite dangerous.
I saw the Ford doing sea trials. There was some stuff on YouTube of the Ford doing sea trials before she was commissioned. And they were turning that thing on a dime at full speed.
Yeah.
So what's the full
that?
speed of that thing is 40 knots or something? It's a lot.
They always say 30 plus.
30 plus.
Right.
Yeah. It's a lot.
Because it's
That's
ships'
classified.
capabilities are limited, but they always say 30 plus. But
Let's
yeah,
say
30
it's
plus.
35 knots. What's that in kilometers per hour? That's
If you ask me in miles per hour,
it's about 50 k.
Yeah,
That's a city traveling at 50 kilometers an hour across the water, and then somebody
Turning
says,
right.
"We're going to go starboard now," and the thing was leaning over, and obviously there were no aircraft on the deck or whatever, but the thing was leaning over like a motorcycle.
Yeah.
It was extraordinary.
And everything in the kitchen's flying from one side
Oh
to the
yeah,
other.
yeah. And somebody usually get that because the sea states are like that.
Yeah.
On the cruisers, they're very top heavy.
Yeah.
And I think the worst experience I had on that was it's actually off of the coast of Virginia, off Cape Hatteras. You've seen the movie Perfect Storm.
Yes.
Yeah, that's where you would do a lot of operations out. But it was in the Med, and because it's so shallow there, like it really builds up some waves.
Builds up. Yeah.
And I remember water. So we were 64 feet up in the air on this bridge, and water's going
Over the top.
over us, and we were routinely would sing 15, 20 degrees to the side because it's very top heavy in there.
So that's what we call grinding off the rain gutters.
Yeah,
on the
that's what
car.
I call getting very, very sick.
Yeah. It happens.
Yeah.
And it was always the pitching that got me, that set of heaviness and lightness. Like after
Yes,
they're like,
up and down.
Yeah,
And
weight
it
is
was what used to crack people up because they're
The
like,
roller
you get
coaster.
seasick? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, and you go on ships and like,
The,
you do get accustomed to it.
The endurance of the construction is another fascinating thing. The engineering, because you're an engineer, the engineering of these things is astounding because the pounding that they have to take. It's rather like people have a fear of aircraft. A friend of mine is absolutely terrified of flying, so he went and did
turbulence.
a Qantas course where they try and I think they actually scare them more, to be honest, because they showed them just what the endurance of the airframe was.
Yeah.
And they've got tests where Boeing have got, or Airbus have got the wings virtually up like a seagull flapping, and the thing is still fine, and it's copping maximum turbulence. And they're saying, well, this never happens in reality, well, seldom, and you're fine. But the engineering of these, where you see those high seas, and how does a huge carrier cut through those seas? Does it cut through, or it still gets?
It can, so there's a benefit to being on something that big, is that they have a tendency. I remember crossing the North Pacific.
Yeah.
And I'm in a wardroom meeting. I think it was maybe Sunday brunch. I don't know. For some reason, Sunday brunch seems to be a very popular time for me. But I remember, and it was like, oh wow, the sea state's really bad out there, like 20-foot seas. You're like, we are moving a little bit.
Yeah.
And so you go up to the hangar bay and look out, and you see this destroyer over on the horizon. It would be
it's
there one
right
minute,
up and down.
Tossing
next
and
minute,
turning.
Next minute, you see this big splash of water. Then it replay again. Then it was disappeared,
Yeah.
and then it was back, and you're like, actually, it is really rough. But on something that big, sometimes you don't notice it
feel
quite
it.
as much. In fact, the Nimitz class aircraft carrier is like very seldom. Like it'd have to be like probably a hurricane or a typhoon for you to really notice it. But it rolled fairly well. I mean, people still got seasick amazingly, but they're pretty stable.
They cut through.
Because they're about 34 to 40 feet deep.
Yeah.
And so when you have that much mass under the water line, it actually helps with that stability and that length of beam. And a lot of the seasickness has to do with the periodicity of the waves.
Yeah.
So, and there is a theory or an equation after worked about ship length and the periodicity of waves. And certain lengths you can't do because it messes with the periodicity. But, the aircraft carriers are quite stable. Now, the smaller ones like the littoral combat ships and those, you get bounced around because they're incredibly light. They're designed to be light. They're designed to be really shallow, like 14 feet draft. They get bounced around, and a lot of them, like the trimarines, is aluminum.
Right.
And aluminum is very
light.
rigid. Well, it's light
yeah.
and rigid. And, like our ships, most of them are steel. and still has a little bit of malleability to it when it comes to the seas.
So, how good are the pilots though to fly off these things? Both the Boxer, for example, with the VTOLs and the guys landing on the full size carriers. I mean, it's finding a postage stamp in a sea.
Yeah. Well, but there's gear that tells them where we're
Yeah,
at,
yeah,
and the
yeah,
communications, and it's quite well orchestrated. Like they know what the lights look like. You can tell by the lights if you had to whether you're high, low, left, right, and so they can line up with that. And then they've also got communication systems that tells them like, hey, you're high, you're low, and the pattern they fly. It's just in some ways it's just like an airport, but a little bit more challenging because now the flight deck is doing this and moving it in. And I think landing on the aircraft carrier is relatively easy, other than the scary factor of that when they land they have to go store afterburners on.
Yes.
Because otherwise, if they miss the catapult wire,
they're in trouble.
Yeah.
So have you landed on a deck?
Only as a passenger.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
And what's it like?
mine wasn't on a jet. It was on we call them the C2s, so the carrier onboard delivery aircraft. So they're a prop plane, and you're facing backwards, and it's just like you're in kind of the dark. It's military, so it's not like
There's no
Virgin or Qantas. There's no business class seat. No hostess. So you're in the
Yeah.
dark. It's usually hot and humid, and all of a sudden you land, and all of a sudden you just stop, and then
Thank
when
God
you
for
take
that.
off, it's like you just go, and there's a little bit of a lull. It depends on how much power they put in the steam they put in the catapult.
Does landing a VTOL, be it a Harrier when you're in command, or now the F-35s, on a slightly pitching deck? Okay, it's bigger. It's not like as you say, a destroyer and rocking and rolling, but on a moving surface, is landing that on a moving surface tougher than being caught by the catch?
I think so. And so when I was on the LCS and I was talking to the Helo pilots, and we had actually some really good, incredibly good Helo pilots. But this is light ship in the heavy seas.
Yeah.
And they were
Because
talking
there's
about
vertical movement.
Yeah, so that's what, and they said they're like 1 minute you're 20 feet above the deck, 1 minute you're on the deck, 20 feet above, and so you think about trying to manage that as a Helo pilot. You're looking, you got your artificial horizon, your horizon reference bar, and you're trying to land at something that could change 20 feet difference.
Jesus.
So it could come up and smack you in the undercarriage.
And that could be actually a very dangerous situation. So they're very well trained, and usually by the time they get to that level, they've already gone through flight school. They've done all the qualification trainings. And they've either have washed out of the program by that point if they don't have the capability, or they're good enough to be able to do it, and they've got it down pretty good.
So they must be watching, in addition to all the computer aids that are available, they've clearly, watching at the time with their artificial horizon, the pattern of the movement of the ship.
Yep.
And pick the time to, no, I'm going to put it on the deck.
Yeah, and exactly what, they're watching the pattern and going, okay, if I wait to here and kind of manage their power level like that. But I think the Helo pilots really true that they work hard. And we joke in the Navy, and at least in the U.S. Navy, we have brown shoes and black shoes. So your brown shoes are your aviators. They all wear brown shoes, and it's like the good life. They fly for 8 hours, or no, that they don't even fly for 8. They fly for a couple hours, and then they get mandatory crew rest for like 8 hours, and they're playing cards and having a good time, and they just drop their plane off.
Apparently playing volleyball on the beach,
play
shirtless.
Volleyball.
Yes.
They land their plane, they throw the keys over to the maintenance team, and they go and make sure it's
Fix
ready
it.
for the next flight.
Yeah.
And then you got your black shoes, your surface warfare folks, and they're the ones down there just grinding away, making sure the propellers keep going round and round, and the food is cooked and all that kind of stuff. So we always joke that Helo pilots were just black shoes. Yeah. Because they really work, because you're constantly, you're playing with that yawl and the stick and really working hard.
It must be harder though with something like a V-22 Osprey to land one of those than a helicopter, because theoretically the helicopter should be more responsive in vertical movement than the Osprey.
We could nerd out on this all day.
I'd have to ask a V-22, but they always seem to do it well because they can actually kind of do a little bit, not just straight up.
Oh, they can move forward and back.
They can almost do like a takeoff a little bit of a short run, a takeoff.
Because their rotors tilt as they're going, don't they?
Yeah, they can tilt it. And I've ridden around in one once when we went to the Charles de Gaulle for a visit in an ocean. I went up in there, and it was just, it's just not my cup of tea, honestly. It's hot, and we're up there, and you go up kind of vertical, and then that transition to forward flight, like it's a different mode, like you're accustomed, and all of a sudden you go like this. It's different, but incredibly capable.
How did the French feel about the fact that you're not even an official aircraft carrier in the same size as they are?
No, that was funny. Talking to the captain of the Gaulle, like, how big is this? He was like, about 41,000 tons. And I'm like, wow, seems bigger than that. I was like, yeah. He goes, how big are you? I'm like, we're depending on our loadout, but anywhere from 40 to 42,000 tons. And you're like, about the same size as your nuclear aircraft carrier. Yeah. But Yeah, it was different going over there.
Theirs is also, we'll throw up the picture, but the de Gaulle's also seem to be much lower in the water.
Yeah. Well, I think it's good, a little bit smaller, but they actually have a very interesting system that I thought was interesting. Is they have counterweights.
Right.
So you know how you saw the Ford leaning over like
Yes.
a motorcycle?
Yes.
They actually have counterweights so that when they turn, it keeps the flight deck level.
Oh.
I thought that was pretty cool.
It's
Just
like
in
a
case you want
Citroen
to try-
DS.
Yeah, just in case you want to land the plane while it's
It's
making
the
a hard
Citroen
right
DS
turn.
of aircraft carriers. There you go, with the hydropneumatic
Hydropneumatic,
suspension.
yes.
Hydropneumatic
And I can't remember
suspension.
the number yet because it was a while ago that we went to the go, but they had to produce so many baguettes a day. You know, they should they had to have it. It's like French law.
Dale, that's been
wonderful.
fascinating. We've taken a lot of your time, but we could talk for another 3 hours.
At least.
But look, we don't get to look behind the scenes at these. Whether you agree with what they're used for or not, these are amazing machines. These are just amazing machines crewed by incredible individuals who come together as a brilliant team to do things that you think are impossible.
It's a lot more complicated than it looks.
You make it look easy. That's the whole point, I guess. Well, it doesn't look easy, really. It looks like hard work, but you make it look like you're so professional at it that you are.
What was the most fun I've had in the Navy was being in command of the Boxer. It was by far my best tour.
There can't be many other steps further up the ladder
No,
unless you're in
so
a
that's,
nuclear powered.
It was part of the point of retiring when I did.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's hard to retire when you're going out when you're at the top, but it's also the best time
Best
to
way to
retire.
go,
Yeah.
Did you still get out on the water?
Not very often. I think it's Spirit of Tasmania I took over once.
Did you go up onto the bridge and give the guy a few tips?
No, I just went and watched the movies. I was like, this is great. There's a movie theater on board.
So thank you very much for your time. We'd love to talk to you again at another occasion, maybe a bit more on the nuclear.
Maybe after we
issue.
see what the Abraham Lincoln's been up to.
Let's see what. Well, actually, one final question. So, is it the Lincoln that's heading, or is it to the Gulf?
Yeah.
And it was in the Pacific.
That was in the South China Sea, I think.
It was in
wasn't
South China Sea. How long
What
does it
was
take
it
him to
doing
get there?
So we had a very similar scenario. There was an operation called Desert Fox,
Yes.
and that would have been, 98?
Mm-hmm.
And we were in Singapore, and we got the order to go, and we went at max speed from Singapore to the Arabian Gulf. It took us 3 days.
3 days.
Wow.
We left the rest of the strike group behind. We didn't need no oil or anything, and we just went. And the night we pulled in, we started launching strikes into Iraq.
Right.
So, but yeah, it didn't. I mean, when you're screaming along that quick, you can do it. And that's one of the advantages of nuclear power when you need something
Over
somewhere.
30 knots, apparently.
Over 30 knots.
Over 30
yeah.
knots. Yes.
We were peaked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's quick.
And how much more difficult is it to move around on a ship when it's going at full
It
crack?
depends on the wind.
Yeah.
You know, if it's really high winds, you're not doing flight operations during that.
Yeah, you just move.
So you have to kind of balance that because the pilots have to maintain a certain amount of hours of proficiency.
Yeah.
And that's usually the thing that slows you down in your transit. You constantly have to turn around and chase wind for the pilots.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you're doing 30 knots, you're not doing flight operations. Everybody's just focused on that one thing, and that's just
get
get
there.
there.
Which is what they're doing at the moment.
and
we
you-
presume.
Which is what they.
Yeah. So you're talking 24 hours a day. You're just screaming along at 30 plus knots.
I guess we can presume that's what they're doing right now. So they should be there any minute.
Yeah.
One would think, if not
They only
already.
just came out of the Straits.
It depends on
Mark,
if they
24 hours
want them
ago.
to go that fast, or if it's more like keep the strike group with you.
Yeah.
So in our case, we were going, and there was not an issue of a threat
Right.
to striking this
Yeah,
aircraft. So you've got to balance that risk. Like,
I guess.
okay, if
yeah.
Or to
the aircraft
defend
carrier
as well
leaves
as
off,
attack.
it's
Yeah. And
defensive, protection, but behind. Are you
But if
comfortable?
you're going potentially in anticipation of striking a hostile who can fight back in some limited capacity, you probably want your strike group around you, I imagine. Yeah. Anyway, listen, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's been a
lovely
great
to
pleasure.
chat. Very good.
And we will watch developments with greater knowledge of just how much effort, let alone how much food has to go into feeding 3,500 people. And how many on the big ones? About 5,000.
On a Nimitz class,
Yeah.
it's generally about 5,000 with air wing.
5,000. Yeah.
Like a big cruise ship.
It's a
really.
city on water.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much,
Lovely.
Dale.
Thank you. Appreciate
you.
it.